hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy that happen after the cardiac arrest. So brain is a galaxy of neurons and the synapses. It comprises of the 2% of the body weight and 15% of the cardiac output with each beat. And 20% of the body oxygen is utilized by the brain. But brain have a very little ability to store the substances, oxygen, nutrients, and the glucose. So actually brain needs all the time a continuous flow of these nutrients and the oxygen. So what happens whenever there is a cardiac arrest, even if within a minute of brain ischemia, there is a 1.9 million of neuron synapses and the miles of the myelinated fibers are lost within a 1 minute. If we start the CPR at its earlier and that is a high quality CPR that would provide the 20 to 30% of the normal cardiac output. This cardiac output of during the CPR is strong, is enough for maintaining the neuronal viability. So there is a, if we talk about the pathobiology, what happens in the brain when there is a cardiac arrest, cerebral blood flow is decreased. Normal cerebral blood flow is 50 ml per minute per 100 gram. So if there is a hypoperfusion and the ischemia of the cerebral tissue, the blood flow is decreased below the 20 ml per minute. There is a cascade of the events that happens into the brain. There is the endothelial disruption, neutrophils diaphysis happens, and there is a coagulation disruption. There is a microthrombi accumulation in the cerebral bed. If this ischemia continues, there is a electrical failure and the depletion of the phosphocreatinine within a minute. And after that, within 5 minutes, there is a ATP depletion, and there is an energy failure, and the blood-brain barrier is disrupted, leading to the brain edema. And after that, at this time, the flow, if there is a further flow decrease into the brain, what happens that there is a membrane failure and accumulation of the calcium and the sodium into the cells, and also there is a excitotoxicity. What does that mean? The glutamate and the neurotransmitters are accumulated into the neuron cells, and there is a necrosis and the apoptosis phenomena. If we are fortunate enough to get the reperfusion, there may chances of recovery. If it is go in process, there will be a irreversible damage. After reperfusion injury, actually there may be a reperfusion injury chances. During the time of ischemia, the brain cells are have lacking of the antioxidants. So whenever there is a hyperemia and the hyperoxia, actually at the time of reperfusion, there is a free oxygen radical formation that leads to the further injury. So the brain, if we talk about the cerebral blood flow specifically, that is controlled by the many methods. That is the myogenic, neurogenic, endothelial, and the metabolic. So specifically, the cerebral blood flow is the cerebral perfusion over the cerebral vascular resistance. And what is the cerebral perfusion pressure? It's the MAP minus mean arterial pressure minus intracranial pressure. And the cerebral oxygen delivery is the cerebral blood flow and the oxygen content. So oxygen, brain is very sensitive organ, and that is much hit and affected by the oxygen, CO2, and the blood pressure. But it also has a very good auto-regulatory system, and auto-regulatory system of the brain is very beautiful. It covers a margin of blood pressure between 50 to 150 MAP. At that status, the brain maintains its perfusion. But the brain is very much sensitive to the CO2 even after the cardiac arrest. If we see this graph, when there is a asphyxia or hypoxia, the brain tries to do the vasoconstriction to maintain the cerebral blood flow, and there is a increase in the blood flow after the hypoxia. But if this hypoxia continues and there is a condition of the arrest, and the condition would be the detrimental. But if we have done the CPR and there we have achieved the ROSC, there will be a cerebral blood flow into the phases. There will be 4 phases. First phase is the phase of no flow during the CPR, and we are trying to achieve the cerebral blood flow. After that, there is a hyperemia phase. In this phase, the oxygen and the blood flow is flooded into the brain. After this phase, there is a hypoperfusion, or the hypoemia phase. Is in third phase, if we maintain the cerebral blood flow, then we could have a good outcome, and the condition would improve in few days. In brain injury, it is a very important question that even after the cardiac arrest, is the brain uniformly injured or the focally injured? So the brain areas which have the more glutamate activity, are the metabolically active, they are more injured as compared to the other areas, like the hippocampus, cortex, and the putamen and the cerebellum. And the clinical conditions and the consequences are according to the affected areas, like the basal ganglia effectiveness lead to the dystonia. If there is a more cortex involvement, that will be lead to the seizure and the coma. And the cerebellum injury leads to the dysmetria and the fine motor problems, and the hippocampus leads to the seizure and amnesia. So the brain is actually involved with according with the ability in which there is a more activity of the glutamate or the energy requirement. So there is a term that is the brain protecting CPR. In contrary to the standard CPR, in which if we start with the ventilation and the compression. This was the entity that was introduced a decade before, in which this was the cardiocerebral resuscitation. If there is a cardiac arrest, start with the compressions, and there is a 200 compression. And after that, there is without checking the pulse and the rhythm, there is again another session. There are 3 to 4 sessions, and in which there is no disruption for the ventilation. Oxygen is provided with the face mask or NRBP, and if there is identification of any shockable rhythm, then the shock is provided. Otherwise, there is no disruption. And 3 to 4 sessions are done only with the compressions. After that, if there is no ROSC achieved, then the standard CPR is started. This was the study that was performed by the Michael and his colleagues, and they compared the cardiocerebral resuscitation with the standard CPR, and they found that in the cardiocerebral resuscitation group, there was a 48% more neurological improvement as compared to the other group. But nowadays, the AHA recommendations are that if there is a bystander are providing the CPR, that should be with the ventilation. If the ventilation cannot be provided in the presence of the bystander, then the CPR should be at least started with the chest compressions. So when to stop the CPR, it is a very debatable question. And for stopping the CPR, it is important to have an adequate information. And for discontinuation of the CPR, and that decision should be made by the team leader and with the consultation of the other team members. And it is also specific to the individual case, and it is not applied in all the cases. And there are many scenarios in which the CPR can be prolonged, like in case of the persistent ventricular fibrillation until the reversible factors have been fixed. If there is a hypothermia and asthma toxicological arrest, in which case the poison may take to be clear from the body, so CPR may be prolonged. And if there is availability of the ECMO in the institution and the personnel, we are waiting for the personnel, so CPR could be prolonged. And there is no time demarcation when to stop CPR. But Morrison and his colleagues have found that they have make some points that if there is no ROSC achieved within 20 minutes, the shock rhythm, there is no shockable rhythm, and the arrest is not witnessed by the emergency medical services, and there are the signs of death, so there is no need to continue the CPR. If we specifically talk about the cerebral monitoring, we will cover all these points in our slides. A neurological examination is always on the top. So there is a start with the initial quick review, and then there is a whole examination. This is the focus examination. This is a question. At that time, after the cardiac arrest, there may be the condition is not so favorable for the whole neurological examination. So the focused neurological examination is better, and that include the GCS and the pupil size. And this is also a question that whether we should get a whole GCS or just a motor scale. So this was a study that was conducted by the Hele and his colleagues, that and they compared the GCS with the motor score, and they found that the motor score alone is a better predictor than the GCS. And the motor score, if it is less than 2, that is related with the poor outcome. So this is the brief outline of the neurological examination. If there is no improvement in the motor system, and there are no response of the pupils within 24 hours, and that condition persists after the 3 days, then there is a poor outcome. And if there is a less than at least 2 grades are improved within 1 day, this is an indication for a good outcome. So if we talk with the cerebral blood flow and the estimation of the cerebral perfusion, there are many entities and the modalities that could be used for the estimation of the cerebral perfusion. That includes the direct and the intermittent methods, that are the stable xenon CT, positron, PET scan, and the perfusing MRI. And nowadays, bedside techniques, including the transcranial Doppler ultrasonography, is also in very being used by the intensivist. It is a surrogate marker of the raised ICP and cerebral blood flow, and it can be used at the bedside. And it is very easy to use, and can and get an idea about the acute condition. Cerebral metabolic and oxygen monitoring can be done non-invasively and invasively. Non-invasive methods include the NURS, regional oxygen saturation. A lead is applied on the forehead, and after that, it works like an SpO2 monitor. The light is emitted from the one side and detected by the other side, and it mathematically calculate the number of the oxyhemoglobin and the deoxyhemoglobin. It can also be applied on the other parts of the body. Normal value is between the 60 to 80%. And if there is mostly it is used by in the post cardiac patients, but it can be used after the after cardiac arrest for the oximetry of the cerebrum. And if there is a drop in the NURS value, that can be improved with the cerebral oxygen perfusion pressure by increasing the arterial oxygen content, by decreasing cerebral vascular resistance, or by decreasing the cerebral metabolic rate. So this is a non-invasive and a good technique for monitoring the oxygen in the brain. This is a direct method for monitoring the cerebral oximetry, and in which the probe is put into the cerebral tissue, and within the area of 1 inch, it could provide a good value, the value of the oxygen. The normal value is between 25 to 35, and it's a continuous real-time monitoring. It is being used in traumatic brain injury nowadays, but it's experimental how to and when to use into this after the cardiac arrest patients. Jugular oximetry is also a very good phenomena that is a very helpful for the oxygen blood flow, oxygen delivery, and the oxygen uptake into the brain tissue. So it is comparable with the superior vena cava and the right atrium oxygen mixed oxygen saturation, but it has been found that by the Bunk and his colleagues that the jugular oximetry was 10% lower than the mixed oxygen saturation within 6 hours after the cardiac arrest. So it is a good marker in contrary to the superior vena cava mixed saturation. So normal value is between the 55 to 75. If there is a more than 75% value, it would indicate there is a hyperemia in the cerebral tissue, or there is no extraction of the oxygen. So if the value is decreased below the 40%, so it would indicate the cerebral ischemia. This is a new modality also that is being used in that is experimental but it is also gaining the importance in many clinical setups. And that is the cerebral microdialysis, in which a vial is placed by the Burhole method into the brain tissue, and then the metabolites surrounding this area is come into the vial, and that are continuously or intermittently taken up by the analyzer, and their value is achieved. It is an invasive method, and there are many markers that could be utilized for the assessment of the brain injury, like lactate and pyruvate ratio, glycerol, and the glutamate. But it's experimental, and there are no clinical data to show its importance. Another strategy that we can use for the brain monitoring specifically is the EEG. So after it is being recommended that after the cardiac arrest within 24 from the first hour there should be a continuous EEG monitoring, and it has been used for the prognostication and for the clinical and the subclinical seizure diagnosis. So the favorable EEG patterns are the rapid EEG, improvement reactivity, and the normal sleep pattern. If they are present, that would indicate the good prognosis. And if there are the burst suppression, excessive discontinuity, and the severe attenuation, or the generalized epileptical discharges are present in the EEG, and then these would indicate the poor outcome. These are the burst suppression that could be identified in the continuous EEG. These are the epileptic continuous severe epileptical form activities that are also associated with the poor outcome. So SSP is also a good modality that is also can be used after the brain injury, and it is also found a better and useful indicator for the prognostication. Leads are applied on the median nerve or on the tibial nerve, and then the stimulus is used, and then the waves are come on the display that are being read, and that indicates the activity. So the if we use the median nerve, the leads are applied at the periphery, at the Erb's point, at the cervical spine, and on the brain surface. So after that, these waves are achieved, and that are read, and that indicates the activity in the neurons. And this is also a good activity, good modality, and it can be used on the bedside. The beauty of this modality is that it is not affected by the sedation and the hypothermia, while the EEG could be affected by that, and absence of SSP is related with the unfavorable outcome. Bispectral index monitoring is also a very important modality that is also non-invasive, and a lead is applied on the frontal lobe, and EEG rhythm is mathematically translated into a number. So there is a number between the 0 to 100. 100 indicates the awake condition, and 0 indicates the flat line EEG, and severe. It indicates the severity of the injury. So it has been found by the Marion and his colleagues that at the 24-hour status after the cardiac arrest, if there was a BIS index was high, that indicates the good neurological outcome, and if it was 0, then it indicates the bad outcome in their study. It is very important to get an imaging after the cardiac arrest, and it is very which kind ideal time of imaging and the best modality, and are there specific findings in the hypoxic brain injury. So let's begin with the scenario. There is a 4-month baby after the non-accidental trauma, and he was collapsed, and CPR was done for 10 minutes and revived and shifted in the PICU. He is intubated, and epi is on the 0.03 mic per kg per minute. BP is 75 to 35 and heart rate 126. Temperature is 37.8. After initial stabilization, CT was performed. So this was the CT in the initial time that indicates the hyperattenuation areas in the peripheral of the brain. That's called the reversal sign. And after that, there is also the hyperattenuated areas of the cerebellum level. That's the cerebellum sign. These both sign indicates the poor prognosis. They say there is also another scenario of the 6-year-old child. The CPR was performed for 30 minutes, and there was an immediate CT was done. And at the level of the basal ganglia, slices shows the normal CT. At the level of cerebellum, there was a cerebellum sign present. So it is possible that in the initial hour the CT could be normal. So it is debatable when to get an image. After in the next day, MRI was performed, and MRI shows at the basal ganglia level the hyperintense areas in the DWI image, and also there is a hyperintense areas in the T2 image. So this was a algorithm that was designed by the Benjamin and his colleagues, that if there is a suspected brain injury and you have get a CT and that is positive, then there is no need to get an image. But if there is negative, then go for the MRI. There are many serum biomarkers that can be utilized, and among them the neuron-specific enolase S100B, glial fibrillary acidic protein, and the myelin binding protein. These are being used, and among them the NSE is commonly being used, and it has been found a poor prognostic marker if it present in the higher concentration in the serum. Multimodality Multimodality monitoring is also being used in many settings and advanced settings, in which all the parameters, including the cerebral perfusion pressure, ICP, cerebral oximetry, and the cerebral dialysis, these are all monitored at the one time in one monitor. There is no clinical data, but this is an experiment, and it can be utilized for the management and the prognostication. If we specifically talk about the brain specific management, from decade ago, therapeutic hypothermia was very much utilized for the treatment in the brain for the brain injury. But after the THEPCA trial that was conducted in 2015 and 17, in hospital cardiac arrest children, it has been found that there was no difference between the hypothermia and the normothermia group. And this was also a study that was conducted by the Frank and his colleagues, that in the out of hospital cardiac arrest there was no difference between the two groups, between the normothermic and the hypothermia. So if we see more about these studies, they get many variables, including the recurrent cardiac arrest, serious bleeding, arrhythmias, infection, and the 28 days mortality, hypokalemia, and the CRRT between the normothermic and the hypothermic group. There was no difference between all these variables except a few. Serious bleeding was noted more in the hypothermic group, and the thrombocytopenia was also noted in the hypothermic group. But they found that the CRRT was more performed in the normothermic group. Regarding the treatment of seizure, actually there is a 50% almost occurrence of the seizure after the CPR, and mostly these seizures are subtle seizure or non-clinical seizures, and there is no prophylactic role of anti-epileptic drugs in these cases. And if there are the clinical seizure and there is need to treat, then there is no difference between the phenytoin, levetiracetam, or the valproic acid. Any drug can be used. There is no benefit on another. If we talk about the sedation and anesthesia, neuromuscular blockade, opioids and the benzodiazepine have been found to be used more commonly, specifically in the adult population. In children, there are no specific data to indication the recommendation of the sedation and anesthesia. Usually the opioids are most commonly being used: nalbuphine, Infusion, morphine, or the fentanyl. But when we are using these medicines, the hypotension is of major concern. And remifentanil is also found as an anesthetic, good anesthetic, because it increases the cerebral blood flow. Whenever there is a need for relaxation, it is mostly used if we are planning for the hypothermia and the therapeutic hypothermia, and if there is a shivering for the prevention, that could be used. So whenever we are using the relaxation, it is important to have an idea that there will be masking of the clinical seizures. So continuous EEG is very important in that cases. There are many advanced and therapies that have been tried by the many researchers, like steroids, magnesium, calcium, melatonin, erythropoietin, and glucagon, like peptides, ketogenic diets. So there are no role and there are no recommendation nowadays. There are many experimental agents that can be used that includes endothelial A, nitrous oxide, anti-NAMDA receptors, anti-apoptotic caspase inhibitor, cellular transplants. So these are all the in trials, and they are in future recommendations. So if we talk about the prognostications, the absent pupillary responses, absent corneal responses, and their extensor or no response to pain are associated with the poor outcome. Myoclonic status epilepticus, absent SSP and NSE level more than 33 have been found also have poor outcome in many studies. And the burst suppression discharges are also associated with the poor outcome. Let's talk about the brain death very briefly. So it is very important to know about the brain death and its mimicries, like the persistent vegetative state, coma, and the locked-in syndrome. So how can we diagnose that? There are the many prerequisites. The patient is off sedation and relaxation more than 48 hours, and there is the hemodynamics are normal, and we need that there is no cortical response, no brain stem response, and the apnea test is negative. Then we label it that the patient have a brain death. And in many centers, ancillary studies are performed in many institutions. It is a part of the brain death criteria, and many believe onto the clinical performance. But if there is a need for the early declaration of the brain death, then these are included at early time. This is the European neuroprognostication after cardiac arrest. There is an algorithm they follow. There is a control temperature, and after that there is a rewarming phase. Temperature, if used, if being planned and used, it is only for the 24 to 48 hours, not for more than that. So after that there is a normothermia. After that there is a plan for after the 3 days they plan for the MRI, and follow all the prognostication factors which we have discussed. So the key points of my presentation are that post cardiac arrest care should affirm with the targeted aim of quality of life. There are 4 components that needs to be keep in mind for while treating the patient after the cardiac arrest. Normoxemia, normothermia, and normoglycemia are the standards of care. Checklist and bundles can improve the survival. Brain is the most sensitive and vulnerable organ after the cardiac arrest. And high quality CPR 20% to provide the 20% of normal cardiac output, that is enough to keep the nerves viability. Neurological examination is always on the top of initial prognostication, and the nurse is non-invasive tool for monitoring the cerebral perfusion. And BIS monitor is a best non-invasive gadget for sedation and prognosis. Multimodal monitoring is a future scope for improving the outcome. And advanced focus therapies are still experimental, and 1/3 have the good neurological outcome that and other face the variable course. These are the references of my presentation, and I am very thankful to the Indian Academy of Pediatrics and the Indus Hospital, Dr. Anwar and faculty. And thank you so much. And now I wait for your questions.